This is Jared Fishman, and you're listening to the 20-Sided Gamified podcast. The past 20 years, I've blended games and education together in the classroom. I'm a history teacher, a game-based learning specialist, and I serve on the board of HMGS Next Gen Inc. and the North American Simulations and Games Association. I'm looking to broaden my own knowledge of game-based learning by talking to the people that do it best. Pull up a chair, get your dice ready, and enjoy the ride. Friends, as we all know, life in the modern world can be pretty tough sometimes. Whether it's that overwhelmed feeling caused by the 24-hour news cycle or that exhausted keeping up with the Joneses marathon that many people feel like they're running on a daily basis, or simply trying to get by day in and day out. The good news is that there are now platforms designed to provide us with the support we need. Our sponsor, BetterHelp, is a wonderful resource that's purposely designed to be accessible and personalized to your exact specifications. With the click of a button, you can sign up and be matched with a professional of the highest standards, a specialist that can be an unbiased support system throughout your week and beyond. And BetterHelp goes out of its way to ensure that your needs are met. If the professional you're matched up with isn't working out, BetterHelp will work tirelessly to match you up with someone who will. Here at 20-Sided Gamified, we fully and readily support our listeners' goals of living healthy, fulfilling lives filled with laughter, fun, gaming, and stories to pass on from generation to generation. We are proud to have a partnership with BetterHelp, and we hope you'll look into this wonderful opportunity and resource at a time where we all may need a little boost. Signing up for BetterHelp has never been easier. Go to betterhelp.com/20sidedgamified to learn more and sign up at a 10% discount for your first month. You can also gain access to BetterHelp through the link provided in our show notes. Thank you so much.
What's up there, 20-Sided Gamified podcast fans? Hey there, this is Jared, your loyal and faithful host of the show. What I'm doing right now is something I've actually I don't think I've ever done this on the show. I'm actually re-recording the intro for the episode that you're about to listen to. Now, why? I'm just going to be super blunt. This was definitely, arguably, I would say one of the most important episodes to me personally that I've ever done for this show. And don't get me wrong, if you're listening out there, if you've been a guest on the show, every guest that we've ever had on the show, meaning all the guests that Kelly and I have brought on, every one of them has been important in lots of different ways. And we've interviewed and talked with so many interesting people and important people when it comes to this hobby that we have called gaming, right? All of that said, right, this one hit me in a particularly different way. And it took me a little while to process why that is. So you're about to listen to my interview with two really luminary figures in what we do, Richard Garfield and Skaff Elias. I paused there because, Elias, not Elias. You probably know who these folks are, right? These are the individuals who came up with Magic the Gathering, right? Which is just so paramount when it comes to thinking about games, right? What I mean by that is, when you talk to people on the street and you ask them about games and, hey, if you've ever played a game, I mean, Monopoly comes up, Risk comes up, and even for mainstream people, somebody will always inevitably say, oh, you mean games like Magic the Gathering? I put it on the same level as D&D, right? It's just as important and it's just as groundbreaking. And I don't know, man. I'm really kind of revealing the curtain here, right? I was unbelievably nervous during this episode. I'm almost never nervous doing anything. That's probably not always the best thing, right? I worry sometimes, am I some sort of arrogant person? I was legitimately nervous. Now, you might be wondering, well, why? Well, when I was in 7th grade, I literally would go to the local library. I would walk there for middle school to sit down and play this brand new game, Magic the Gathering. It opened a lot of doors for me. It opened my eyes in particular to how intellectual and educational games can be. I mean, I just, it's hard to forget, what it was like opening up those cards as a really like little kid, trying to figure out how to make them work together and all the brain power that it would take to really think of the best possible strategies that you could use, and how to use those cards in conjunction with one another. So the reason I wanted to re-record this intro is because I think that the way that I just did this now, I think it's going to give you, the listener, just a little bit more sort of clarity, really, for the whole episode. What I'm going to do is we're just going to go right into the Q&A part, and thank you, Adi Pandit, for kind of making that happen. Other than re-recording this intro, everything else, as always with the episode, is going to be exactly as it came up during conversation. If you're interested as to how this kind of came together, it was very random. My buddies and I, in the game, in our little Tuesday night game club, we played King of Tokyo several weeks ago. And King of Tokyo is a Richard Garfield game. And obviously, Skaff had a huge amount to do with it as well. So when we were playing the game, I had no idea who designed it. Absolutely no idea. I had never really played it before, and we loved it. And I remember saying to the whole group, man, this would be great for kids. Like, this would be literally perfect to run in a classroom as like a classroom activity because of a whole slew of different reasons. So we look at the front cover and it's like, oh, it's Richard Garfield, right? From Magic. And me, like a dullard, I'm like, yeah, I wonder how one would get in touch with, these guys who came up with this whole concept. And Mike really quickly, Googled it and figured out how to get in contact. I wrote the email, and it literally came together in like 2 or 3 days. So again, folks, I don't know. Like, I don't know how you guys are gonna take this in terms of the episode itself. When you listen, I don't know. I might sound like a complete moron during the whole thing. I have no idea. Bottom line, though, is this episode meant a lot to me. It's so cool that they like the show. And like I have been saying this whole time, I think that what they did for really the world of gaming is just so damn vital. And they were super cool. And it was a really, really, really nice conversation. So, with my rambling finished, without further ado, please enjoy my interview of Richard and Skaff. I really hope that you enjoy this. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Great to be here.
Thank you for having us. Yeah,
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
By the way, that wasn't too embarrassing. It's just that, how could I not mention these things? You know what I mean? You must get it all the time.
Yeah, that's true. I would like to clear up a couple things because it was even more embarrassing for me than normal. First of all, Magic is like 99% Richard. There were other people that helped him a lot, and that a lot amounted to 1%. And then the second thing is that we weren't really the founders of Wizards of the Coast. Richard had sold the game to. There's a guy called Peter Atkinson who was the president. So. On the business side of stuff, like all the actual hard work was in fact done by other people. So just, I felt I needed to mention all that.
No, I understand. But still, though, I mean, it's you guys. Like, you're being very humble. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Skaff, but you had an enormous amount to do with like sets like Arabian Nights, Legends, Ice Age, Fallen Empires, all that, right? Am I incorrect there? Or
you are. I mean,
sort of
correct in the number of sets, but Arabian Nights was all Richard. Legends was a different set of people, but like Antiquities, Ice Age, Fallen Empires, Alliances, and then developing a lot of the sets I did do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I gotcha. Well, thank you for clarifying that. Again, I think you're both being very humble. So look, guys, I really appreciate the fact that you're on. What I would love to kind of start with, just for the purpose of our audience, and maybe Richard, I don't know if you want to start. Could you talk a little bit just in general about how you got into the hobby of gaming, whether that was starting with a role-playing game or miniatures games or whatever your origin story is?
Sure. My entry into gaming, I usually credit to Dungeons and Dragons. When I first ran into Dungeons and Dragons, I was blown away by how orthogonal it was to everything I knew about games. And a lot of people, that's not an unusual experience. I don't think. My response to it was a little bit less usual, I think, which was a lot of people, when they run into Dungeons and Dragons, they devote themselves to Dungeons and Dragons or some role playing, which is not too far from it. I did that to some extent, but really, I put a lot of my effort into learning what else there was out in games. So I began to look at game stores, but also just get books on games and read about games historically. And I took it upon myself to just try to find out everything I could about it, because it felt like a really exciting place to explore. And and that's where I started.
That's awesome. And where in terms of the US, like where are you from specifically?
When I was young, we moved around a lot. I was born on the East Coast in Philadelphia, lived 6 years in Nepal and Bangladesh, and then moved to the Northwest. So the time I was becoming a gamer was when I was living in Eugene, Oregon.
Gotcha. Awesome. So Skaff, I wanted to kind of lead you in here. Now, did you guys know each other from school? Did you guys meet after the fact? So kind of like, what's your story in terms of this long journey you both have had with games?
I met Richard when we were both in grad school in University of Pennsylvania in the math department there. So that's the first time I met him. And then he was like a vortex sucking people into playing his games. And I was one of those people that got trapped early on. So from 1991, yeah, basically, as soon as I got to grad school, I was playing games with Richard.
Very cool. And what were you guys studying?
Math. I was actually physics when I first started, but I had switched to math by the end of that year, and then Richard was math.
Gotcha. And what about your origin story? And just in terms of games, like had you been playing games before you got to grad school, or was it more like going into Richard's vortex?
I Dungeons and Dragons was also influential on me, but I played a lot of like card games with the family, and then a lot of these like military board games. So hex map games, and then I know a little bit about your podcast. I know that's your you love those things. So.
Oh, I do, yeah. And again, like if I seem weird right now, you guys just have to understand that, as humble as you guys were with some of those corrections at the beginning, like I've known about you guys for a really long time. I mean, I was being very genuine. I hope my parents aren't listening, but I would like ditch classes like mad early to like go to the library to meet up with other kids who were ditching class. And we were all relatively smart and sitting down and playing, again, like I got into Magic. If my memory serves right, this is a long time ago. I think it was around Re-Revised, if my memory, because I had got in a little late, to get the quote unquote cool cards. But so yeah, if I seem a little weird, it's just because in a weird way, I feel like I've known both of you for a long time, as creepy as that sounds.
It has been a long time.
Yeah, no. So what of those military board games that you were talking about, do you have any titles that you can kind of remember growing up playing?
Oh yeah, I mean, tons of them. I mean, the first one probably I played was maybe Panzer Group of Guderian. I don't know if you know that game.
Of course I do. Yeah,
like one of the first ones, right? A lot of different Civil War, World War I simulation games. I actually really liked it's like Sixth Fleet, the sort of the modern Mediterranean game, and all the other ones that followed after that. I don't know, Panzer Leader. I don't know. Just also, I mean, a little bit of less Squad Leader than everyone else played. But anyway, I can't remember the title. I played a lot of World War One. World War I Hex Map. I can't. That title's not coming to me. They all blur together after a while.
Yeah.
And then eventually, many years later, when I was at Wizards of the Coast, some of Richard's friends from his. You met Mons in middle school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
no, more high school.
High school. Okay. Well, like Third Reich and stuff like that, but that was much later. So
was it history that drew you to these games, or was it more like the mechanics?
It was both. I mean, I really loved the old history of all that stuff. Oh, and I also played, like miniatures games too, like Napoleonics and stuff like that. I think Empire was the.
Oh man, yeah. You know why I'm making that sort of face?
Yeah,
exactly. It has a reputation.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So anyway, and that was more college. By that, a little bit in high school, more college. I had an uncle that got me into it, so I loved the rules a lot, but also the history.
No, very cool, very cool. Yeah, I mean, games are so crunchy back then because again, like I grew up doing a lot of this stuff because my dad in the 70s was playing a lot of these games. I was born in 81. So I have a little bit of a weird trajectory with games where most people start with board games and then kind of expand out. I'm the opposite. I actually really only discovered like especially like military history style board games like recently, like within the last 10 years. I started with miniatures. So it's like it's a little bit almost like counterintuitive to have these beautiful miniatures and then kind of go and then all of a sudden, you're playing with hexes and counters and stuff like that.
Totally.
Gotcha. So like I was saying, I really want to talk about King of Tokyo, but I think we would be missing something without talking a little bit about the history of Magic. Because I mean, ultimately, it sounds like, Richard, you've been designing games for probably long before Magic. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. I think, in some ways, when you get into Dungeons and Dragons, you automatically become a game designer, especially back in the days where the rules were so terrible. And that's really both for people running the game and the players as well. You're really put in a position where you're in charge of your own game experience. And so almost immediately I began extending that design to other things.
Yeah, for sure. I totally understand that. Were you usually the game master, or were you usually a player in the game?
Almost exclusively game master.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I don't know about you. What about you, Skaff? Were you more of a player or more of a GM type?
I definitely started out as just a player, and then in college was the first time I think basically college, first time I GM'd. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's like when you're going to try to put a really great game together for people, you got to have a great narrative, but you also have to know the mechanics too. So Richard, I completely understand what you mean. You really are building your own world, especially when you're running your own games, for sure. So look, again, you've probably been asked this question a million times, but I think we should go here, right? So Magic puts you guys on the map. Do you want to whatever extent you feel comfortable, could you describe a little bit of what that, no pun intended, but like what that Magic sort of looked like in the early to mid 90s when you guys were developing all this stuff?
So are you asking about when it was under development or when it first came out?
Well, you know what? I purposely, and I said this to you guys before we started, I purposely like to be surprised. I've played Magic for years, but I would love to hear the whole story. Yeah. So meaning, absolutely, if you want to go back as far as development, absolutely, rock and roll.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's hard to pin down exactly when Magic began because my games are such. There's so much evolved rather than created whole. And so there was an epiphany early on that not all the players had to have the same deck. And that is what Magic was built around. And you can say that's when it started. And that was 90 or 91. But the mechanics that were being used were part of some magical themed card games that I had been working on for a long time. So you can extend that back, to when I was an undergraduate, probably in 81 or 82.
Oh, wow.
So it really extends back quite a ways when you begin looking at where, and that's one of the reasons actually why the flavor of Magic had so much internal consistency. The relationship between the colors and everything else was I was focused almost entirely on the mechanics, but there was this sort of mythos that had been built up around the colors already that I was drawing from other places, and so a lot of work had already been done in that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's such a fascinating point because, again, I mean, we could probably talk about this for hours. I mean, when you were answering there and describing that, yeah, the aesthetics matter so much in that game. It's just such a unique game out there. I mean, obviously me saying that now because so many other card games have come out. But when you go back in time, man, and again, I don't want this to be weird, but just opening those packs and looking at the artwork and looking at how individualistic each card was, just the aesthetics of it, even if you weren't interested in the game, meaning the mechanics, there was a real beauty to those cards, And again, like even the thematic stuff when it comes to all the different colors and things like that. So yeah, very cool. And Skaff, where do you fit into this? Like when did you kind of come into this vortex of not just Magic the game itself, but also like being part of it?
Yeah, so I was just so lucky to literally kind of sit near him in grad school. I think everyone that's worked with Richard now, Richard needs to turn off his headset because he might be embarrassed here. But everyone that worked with him, like as he says, D&D turns you into game designer, right? Okay, so sure, that's true of everybody. Like even in undergrad, you can see that. But then like he took it to the next level, and so he had a really deep understanding about a lot of this stuff. So that was enticing because, okay, first of all, you're having fun. Second of all, you're playing his games. Third of all, he's very, asks you your opinion because he's always trying to take in information and process it. But then he has this like way of looking at stuff that felt really good to someone who, again, in academics, whatever, physics, math, et cetera, it doesn't matter. There are lots of other fields where, he's trying to look at patterns and deeper strategies, just about how games work and how game design works. And so it's just very enticing to raise all that to the level of like, science is too strong a word for it, but I would say scientific sensibility is being used, like really looking at why you're doing the things you're doing. So that made it just really fun to be around and to work on. And I think, and that influence extended to lots of people that, would hang around and play games with them.
Yeah. How many initial people were involved in getting Magic off the ground? And when I say off the ground, what I mean is really into that fully fleshed out state when it actually came out. Meaning, like, how many playtesters were there? How many other sort of hands, Richard, were involved in this process?
There were a lot of playtesters. How many would you say were at Penn, Skaff?
So Penn, the first group, right, was just the math, physics, computer science guys, and then that was probably, trying to think about how many decks we made. Maybe in the 20 range, 20 to 20-ish range, say. But then it got into like extended after that, like sort of a few local friends, but like the chess and bridge groups. And then once that hit, and then their friends, then it was probably more in maybe as many as 50 people were playing. That might be too much. I don't know, but somewhere around there.
Yeah. And that was the largest playtest group, certainly. But we also had a group in Atlanta. We had one in Canada. We had
and Wizards of the Coast, right, in Washington. Yeah. So
and so when you're talking about playtest, there was actually, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there might not have been 100, but there could have been. Maybe.
In the back of my brain, there's a number like 80 kicking around, 80 something from from later when I think someone tried to compile it. So let's say roughly 100 playtesters.
And more broadly, of course, it was more than just the playtesting. The stuff that Peter was doing, setting up Wizards of the Coast and getting it geared up so they could actually do this with art being one of the major things. So we had a lot of artists working on it. We had Premiere Force, who was sort of managing that and directing the art. There were people involved in trying to figure out, mostly through Peter, but he had a bunch of people who were trying to figure out how you go about getting cards printed and what the quality of the card should be and how you're going to randomize them, because cards games in those days, of course, weren't printed that way. Trading card games were. So, but trading cards make, in general, not very good cards because they're not meant to be shuffled and so forth. And so there was just a lot that had to go on and learned about, especially considering we were all learning it.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
It's kind of just hysterical to me because I'm thinking about this. I mean, when I was a kid, I collected like baseball cards. So we had, and I don't know if you guys did either, but you'd have the binders filled with like the little inserts that you'd put all your cards in. I think it was usually like 9. But the thing is, I mean, did card protectors even exist before you guys designed Magic for individual cards? I don't mean the hard shell cases. I'm talking more what we have now.
I believe they did. I think there were stuff for trading cards, right? Because trading cards sort of predate all this. So sometimes they would have individually sleeved trading cards. So the ones with the solid back, I don't know that those were around. I'm not sure. But I do remember very early on in Magic, I was forced to do some business stuff for Magic in the early days. But like Ultra Pro did a license agreement with us, and that was maybe 95 or something like that. And they had already had product lines before, and I'm pretty sure they were for trading cards.
Gotcha.
That could be carted around individually and stuff.
I wouldn't be surprised if, since then they probably redesigned them so that they can be shuffled.
Like they sure, for sure, absolutely.
These things wouldn't have been.
The earliest ones that they had, when you tried to shuffle them, they would split all the time. So you had to like pile shuffle. You couldn't. Now you can actually take them and you can actually even riffle shuffle them on the side and do the whatever you call it, the side shuffle thing. They're really good at that now. In the old days, when you tried to do that, they would just split all the time.
Yeah, I vaguely remember being in middle school, and it was almost like, and again, you guys were on the ground floor. I mean, obviously, when people started realizing the value of the cards, that's when I remember a lot of people starting to sleeve them in different ways or protect them in different ways. But man, Jesus, like thinking back, so many people didn't have those and were just sort of shuffling them, and you know what I mean, and like kind of nicking them and things like that. I would rather for those folks that had some of those original cards, they probably kicked themselves in the same way that like my dad tells stories of having like tons of Mickey Mantle rookie cards, back in the day,
Right. And just throwing them on the floor and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
tearing
for sure.
Them up to toss on the table for the Chaos Orbs.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Absolutely. Let's talk mechanics for a second when it comes to Magic, because again, I would surmise that a lot of this will kind of come back when we talk about King of Tokyo, but it sounds like, and again, I'm often wrong on this show, so if I am, just point it out. It's not a big deal. It sounds like the idea of being able to customize a deck, right? It sounds like that was really paramount to you guys. Is that accurate in terms of gameplay, and then just in terms of just the way that you designed the game? Is that accurate?
Yeah, that was that was in one sense the essence of the game, the where the game started. But it is half a step from the start. My original epiphany was that people didn't have to have the same equipment, and that is not logically the same as being able to customize your equipment. And so when Magic first came out, we were picturing people having less cards and doing less customization than you saw. When we were playing, we would give people 60 cards, 100 cards, and they would choose which to play. And it was, we learned how much fun it was to decide what you were going to play out of those. And later on, we would draft cards, and that would be it. So customization came very quickly, but it wasn't until Keyforge came out that it sort of came back to the other end of that, which is not customization, but just playing something unique and distinct, which in Keyforge, when you get a deck, it is unique. It has its own unique name on the back and unique contents.
Yeah. So I completely understand where you're coming from, right? So, and all I can talk about is my own experience. There really is something very powerful. And again, I like to take it back to academics, right? Almost looking at, obviously games are meant to be fun. I always said it to my students, and we talk about that concept on the show all the time. But if we're talking about like the intellectual pursuit when it comes to games, right? There's something very powerful about saying, here's 60 cards, figure it out. Because you have to figure out your strategies. You have to figure out what's going to work. But on the flip side, right? And again, this is the beauty of the game, is that you can kind of play it how you want. God, I can remember just parts of my brain opening up that had really never opened before, where it's like, wow, there are just these thousands of cards. I could literally come up with a concept in my brain. I just need to find the cards to be able to pull it off. That's really unique. And don't get me wrong, you guys are both, I'm getting the sense that you're both pretty humble, because Richard, even the way you were describing it, it almost sounds like you're talking about D&D in the early days of designing this game, like referring to cards as equipment. I don't know if it's exactly the same thing though. Like, don't get me wrong, like character design in D&D is one thing, and like people will kind of min-max and try to get their best character. Dude, Magic is just a different beast. I would spend hours talking to people about building decks. So I don't know what your reaction to that is, or maybe even like what your intention was. If that makes sense.
Well, my intention was pretty open-ended. I began with this idea that games is this wonderful area that is largely unexplored, and to explore some. And we had this wonderful concept of giving people distinct equipment, and where can you go from there? It's one of the reasons why. There were a couple of reasons. After Arabian Nights came out, I stepped back from Magic design, and although I participated in designing sets over the following 20 years, I was definitely focused on other things, and there were a couple of reasons for that. One was that I recognized that Magic was too big a concept to be filtered through one person, and so I wanted people to have some ownership over it and some stake in it, and develop their own skills. And the second thing was that I wanted to explore more territory in this area of trading card games, which we had just opened up, and so I worked on Netrunner, Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, and BattleTech, and so forth. So for me, it's just I wanted to have always enjoyed exploring games.
Yeah, very cool. I'm a massive White Wolf guy. I love the old White Wolf stuff. So it's kind of funny. I'm as a classroom teacher, I almost never want to say that,
Yeah, sure.
Because it's so, but that, like, I kind of grew up playing that. Don't get me wrong, I played D&D as a kid, but there was just something so cool about the World of Darkness. And my buddies and I had been playing that game essentially since 2002.
You probably, since 2002. You didn't.
Yeah, so when I was in college.
Middle school. Oh, okay.
No. I didn't discover Vampire until a friend of mine kind of coaxed me into going because he wanted the XP. Dan Garcia, if you're listening, hello. Yeah, he wanted the XP, so he brought me to a LARP. So I actually started playing Vampire as a LARPer, and then discovered, the actual old green book. So
I'm going to turn my camera on.
Indeed. So yeah, I love that. I love all that stuff. Though I won't lie though, I never played the card game. So you were the designer of Jihad, right? Is that correct?
Yes,
Richard?
Yeah. Yes, that's correct.
I never got a chance to play that, unfortunately. I have
you should.
I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, Skaff.
You should check it out. It's interesting. It is not, if you are a traditional TCG player and you're a Magic player and you're a one-on-one and you're competitive, you can easily be fooled into thinking like, oh, hey, that's, whatever. Not a great game, not a TCG. But it's, if you understand the target that's being trying to hit there, it's like Jihad leads very much into the King of Tokyo, by the way, because there's a colossal similarity there. So fundamentally, right, the World of Darkness stuff is, it's very political, like hyper political. And that doesn't always work if you've got a multiplayer game with politics, and you can't scrub the politics out of the World of Darkness stuff, because if you do, then it's no longer Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, right? It's not supposed to be some one-on-one dueling game. So then the design for Jihad is kind of brilliant. I mean, it really works where you have this, like, I would say, the correct amount of politics. Like if you have that be unfettered, then you don't even care about your game rules. Like you sit down and you just vote for who the most popular person is. And Jihad is like this beautiful, like, tightrope walk, where you have the politics, but it's also under control. Like, if you've ever played the old Dune board game, it's kind of similar to that, where there's restrictions on the politics. It's all about politics, but has enough restrictions that it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Also, to be fair, like, and again, I love the old green book. I mean, the combat system in general for tabletop, White Wolf Vampire was never that great. I mean, it's kind of easily breakable, but I think that's sort of the point. I mean, in the sense that, look, this is how I look at it. When I run a vampire game, if I run a campaign for a year and combat is happening all the time, I'm not doing my job right as an ST. Right. That's kind of...
And the players aren't either, right? They're supposed to be negotiating, right?
Yeah.
And making deals and whatever.
Yeah, the only tricky thing about running those games is then, like, feeling like you need to shower after every session, because if it's good, the players who are best friends are all just, plotting against one another. It really literally, like, drains me to the point where I can't always play it, but it is really badass. No. Here's the thing. If it's cool with you guys, and we can always circle back to Magic, I think this is such an opportune time, right? And not planned, but I think we could probably make the jump to King of Tokyo for a second. Because, again, what an amazing game. Again, like, I could beat the horse about Magic and how wonderful that is, but King of Tokyo really blew me away when I played it a few weeks ago. If you guys are ready to kind of roll, I mean, where are the connections between Jihad and that game? And maybe another way to frame that would be, where did that design sort of come from in terms of your brains?
So I'm gonna interrupt and lay a little bit of groundwork here, because Richard's obviously the main designer of it, and so
go for it.
I like to think that my whining helped him a little bit push him in the King of Tokyo direction, because I hate games with politics in them. I hate them so much because I'm always the least popular person, so I always get voted out. And I don't know. I should be better with them than I am, and I bitch about it a lot. And so, if you're going to have a game that's like a family game, it's for 4 players or 5 players or whatever, and you don't want to have to team up, or you've got an odd number of players, there's really not much out there. So then Richard, like, again, in his brilliance, kind of like similar to what he did with Jihad, he made a game where it's not two-sided, and yet the politics is under control. So now he can start and tell me the truth about whether my whining was any inspiration for him at all with King of Tokyo.
You don't seem like a whiner, though, at all. I mean, granted, we don't know each other, but you don't strike me as that kind of type of person.
The whining is my favorite affectation. I'm not at heart really truly a whiner, but boy, do I love the routine. The whining routine, honestly, I really get into.
But games bring that out, right? I don't know if you guys, before we kind of get into it, right? Have you guys ever played Rising Sun by any chance?
It doesn't sound familiar. What is it?
It's I believe it's Robert Lang. I hope I'm getting his name right. I guess the only reason I bring it up is because it is a deeply political game. And it just breeds argument. Like that's just the nature of those types of games. But I do think the whole idea of whining is actually kind of important because you figure games out,
So I don't mind politics in a game like Diplomacy where it's front and center. My thing is I hate when it's really there and people think it's not. That's my low point. But anyway, yeah, Richard, you can talk about designing King of Tokyo.
All right. Yeah, Richard, the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, certainly. I think for King of Tokyo in specific, I'm not sure whether that whining was influential, but in general, it certainly guided my development of games. So, and it's hard to that attitude has influenced a lot of my game design. I'm sure as early as Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. With King of Tokyo in specific, it began its life as this exercise of I was playing Yahtzee, and I had a friend, William, who was taking Yahtzee very seriously. He's a mathematician, very smart guy, and so I was had some discussions with him about it, and was sort of saw what he found appealing about it and how much depth there was to Yahtzee. And of course, it's not often recognized because people look at it and it's very very broad and it's a dice game, but it's but there's a lot going on if you want to play it right. And so in the process of admiring this design, I asked how I would modify it. And I thought, well, there's two things. I would want to see it be interactive in some way, and I would want to have a theme. And so for the interaction, after fiddling around with it a while, came up with this idea of using basically a King of the Hill structure, because in political games where you can affect somebody else's position a lot of the problems come from having a lot of flexibility in who you affect. Like if I can choose to knock you out of the game or knock Skaff out of the game, that's, that can happen in games that are good. But if it's pretty easy to get to that point, it becomes not about the game, but about that decision. And it's particularly bad if it's a 3-player game, and then whoever I don't knock out gets the next turn. And so a lot of this technique of designing interactive games, which where you can really affect other people's position, is giving yourself some control over whether people can affect your position and limiting who you can affect. And so there you get the King of the Hill thing, where you can only attack the people on the hill. Now, other incidental things will affect other people, but the main mechanic is you have no choice. It's how much do you want to beat up on the person on the hill? And the person on the hill has some control too, because they don't have to stay on the hill. They can get off the hill. So that was the mechanical end of it. The theme end of it, I often design games with a placeholder flavor of fantasy. So because fantasy is a very broad tool, and you can do a lot with it very easily, very quickly, without any effort. And so the original game was fantasy themed, clerics and fighters and so forth. And I had a brainstorming session with Skaff over what the final theme should actually be, and we came down to two things at the end: a gangster one, sort of, it was going to be King of New York, or King of Tokyo, which was this kaiju game, and we went with the kaiju, and that's where we ended up.
I won't lie to you. I'm just sort of imagining the characters from Goodfellas on that tabletop. It's pretty
King
funny.
of New York one, yeah, right. Obviously, the theming there. I mean, you may not be playing it with your family, right? Kind of thing.
Right. So
in retrospect, it's probably good it ended up where it did.
No, because I say this as a completely positive word. There's just something so whimsical about that game, right? It's just fun. Like there's just something inherently fun about it. And by the way, I don't want to, given that I have the authors there, I don't want to butcher this, but if you're listening, you've never played this game. You know what? How about I not butcher it? Skaff, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, me?
Yeah, completely. Because I know how much you love this game. Skaff, could you, for somebody that's never played it before, could you just almost pretend that you're in a plane flying over the tabletop and describe to somebody what this board looks like and what the like just literally like what it would look like if somebody sat down to actually play it? Are you cool with that, or is that too much on the spot?
No, I mean I can a little bit. It's very simple, right? You've got a map, a high level shot of Tokyo, and there's the place in the center where the king of Tokyo is, and then everybody else is outside. And it's very, of all the board games that have ever been, it's the least boardy, right? It's not geometric really at all. You're either in or you're out. It's some slight variations if you have enough players, but that's basically it. And then you're all playing these giant monsters, and you're after fame, and you want to kind of be the ruler of the world or whatever. You want to be the king of the monsters, and starting off humbly inside Tokyo, and then as it goes along, you start to build up cards and energy. And the cards are like extra powers that you get. So you'll see these monsters, and they'll have a couple cards each that are like, extra brain, and the two heads and the grow spikes on your tail and stuff like that. So that's pretty much it. A lot of dice. So that's the thing. If like we wanted it to be, well, Richard wanted it to be fun and freewheeling combat, and like he said, the Yahtzee was the origin. So it's a lot of like pressing your luck and rolling your dice and
awesome.
Seeing what happens.
What I really like about it, and maybe you guys can comment on this, because again, you guys obviously as game designers, and especially with like your academic pedigree and backgrounds, everything that you guys do is so deliberate. Not every game is like that, So again, I say this, it could be a very silly question, right? Or a silly statement. What I love about King of Tokyo, and what really stood out to me, especially from the lens of not just the gamer, but like as a classroom teacher, because basically we don't know each other, but basically what I do is I'll take different kinds, most of them are history games, and I will roll them out in the classes I teach, right? And what we do is we try to figure out, well, what is this game saying about history? What are these mechanics meant to do? And in that sense, and from that lens, what I love about this game is, and you guys let me know, like if this was intentional, you're making decisions all the time. Literally at every juncture, whether you're rolling the dice and you're trying to figure out what to keep or what to kind of throw away, you've got an ever-changing set of cards that you can buy, right? And then your upgrades, like, for example, like adding the spiked tail to your creature. There's literally not a second in that game where you're not thinking about something. How intentional was that on your part? So I guess really, Richard, I guess that would be directed at you.
Well, yeah, it was definitely the intent that to give you at any point a number of different things to think about. The way we designed the game was I viewed it as a three-legged game. The three basic pillars to the game. One was you win by victory points. One was you knock the other players out. And one was collecting energy, which could support either of those or both of those. And so with those three different directions of play, it works well with dice. And the reason for that is that if it was a more deterministic board game, you might pick one of those strategies and that's what you focus on. And here you can do that, but with dice games and a lot of card games, they really task you to adapt to what the opportunities are. And this can drive a lot of board game players nuts because they pick a strategy and then they can't perform it. But the the card game player is usually more adept at picking a strategy, but then taking advantage of what comes their way or dealing with the threats that come their way. And so the fact that a lot of this stuff is being doled out by the dice means you're constantly weighing what you want to do, what your overall strategy is, with what the dice are giving you the opportunity to do, and deciding whether to take something that's small towards what your global strategy is, or take something larger in a different direction. And I love that challenge, and can easily get into a position in a lot of games where I'm making the wrong decision because I'm get too focused on something rather than going with the flow.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Yes, Skaff.
I was hoping Richard wouldn't say that, because I was going to come in and say that that's the coolest part of the game. It's amazing how you watch people, and you have to. It's not just the role that you get, and then how much you want to force that. It's also what's happening with the other players. And so, like, every single turn, like, sometimes you have easy turns, right? Like, you say, "Oh, I want to go for this," and you go for that, and you get that, and your rolls are all that. Great, no problem. But that's usually not the way that game goes. And so, being light on your feet strategically is the absolute core of that game. And I should mention before it goes away, like, you talking about intentionality. So I will plug a little bit this book that we wrote, Characteristics of Games, with a third co-author, Robert Kuchera. And so, and tie it back to the beginning with what I love about working with Richard is exactly how intentional he is at seeing these things. There's so many good games, and a lot of them, weren't intentional. They just happened. But, like, to be able to say, this is what I want to happen in the game, this is what I'm going for, this is what I want to highlight, and then hit that target. It's fun. It's just fun to work on. So
yeah, and it seems like, again, knowing all the different games that you guys have had your hands in, this is the point that I made earlier. You are very intentional. Like, you are both very clear about what it is that you want your game to be, which I admire a lot. Because, again, there's, don't get me wrong, like, I haven't played every game, but man, sometimes you open up a rule book and it's like, have you guys play tested this? Have you thought at all about this? And it's very frustrating, know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to one of your mechanics. So you're right. Like, I would imagine that for some people, the act of rolling those dice must be really frustrating. And what made me think of that too is you mentioned diplomacy, Skaff. Mm-hmm. That's probably the game I play the most in school because I'm a history teacher. Oh,
really?
Oh, God. They love it. They love it. We play diplomacy, I would say, in my military history class that I teach. We probably play it 2 or 3 times a year. I use it as a way for the kids to understand World War I and, like, why the war came about. And there's also a classical version that we do before we do, like, the Romans and, like, real, like, antiquity, Yeah. But, it's interesting. What they love about that is that there's no luck. Kids get bent out of shape.
Well,
games, right? There's luck in the sense that,
because there's rock, paper, scissors, right? Like, you're guessing on the
Yeah, all I mean is it's not like you're rolling dice, It's not like
that's true.
Worry about that,
Many people don't think there's luck there, but of course, they're really. I know exactly what you're saying, and that's how people feel about it. So that's good. They're like, oh, I could have chosen to, support whatever.
Go ahead.
But. Yeah, so
Richard, you were going to say something.
There's a language disconnect, which often happens when people are discussing about games. They don't have consistent definitions of luck. They don't have consistent definitions of skill, and so there are no overt randomizers in diplomacy. It's absolutely true.
I will say this though. It sucks if you have to play Austria-Hungary, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I like playing them because of how challenging they are, because you really. You're going to get hit by 3 different people. So it's like, you had better make sure that one of them is your ally. I think like that, if you get one of the nations that maybe are a little bit more difficult, I think sometimes kids will get bent into shape. But circling back to, King of Tokyo or whatever, look, I like the fact that you're rolling the dice and you have to work with what you have. I find for kids is great because it's a great metaphor for life. Like, you're not always going to get what you want. You're not always going to have the perfect set of circumstances to do whatever you need to do, and you got to work with what you have. And that was another thing that I thought about, because like, being very specific, I had like killer rolls at the beginning of the first game I played, and it was like easy. It was like my decisions were a piece of cake to figure out what to do. But once they started to suck, that was an entirely different beast. And that, in a way, I almost liked it more when that happens, you know? So, how many iterations of King of Tokyo is there? Because it seems like there's a couple of versions, right?
Yeah, there's King of New York, which is more, it's just a little bit deeper. There's a little more going on with King of New York.
There's an actual map.
There's like a real map that matters more than it does in King of Tokyo. You're destroying. I mean, you're fighting humans like in a, you know, because they're fed up with what happened in Tokyo, I guess. So they're fighting back. So that's still there. That's still basically King of Tokyo. Then there's King of Monster Island, and that's a cooperative game where, in the grand tradition of some of these eventual kaiju movies, like all the monsters now you're fighting against an alien invasion. Still King of Tokyo, still you really have to play the roles. I mean, that's sort of the fundamental. Press your luck and play the roles as opposed to play a strategy is fundamental in that, just like it is in all of them. But obviously the cooperative nature makes it much different. And then there are 1 zillion little power-ups, which give you, you know, unique monsters and let you, you know, explore their particular means of whatever evolution.
Gotcha.
There's a something that people wanted very quickly was to have something different between the monsters they were playing and other people were playing. And of course that happens during the course of the game. You build a different monster, but it's not the same as beginning out with a monster that feels different. And that turned out to be a kind of sticky design problem, and it took me a while to put my fingers on it. And I realized that what it was that if you took the straightforward route, for example, and said, okay, Mecha Dragon is good at attack, well, then you're taking this 3-legged strategy game of I'm going to go for victory points, or I'm going to go for attack, or I'm going to try to develop, you know, get energy. And you're making it so that player feels like they have one which is for them, and they feel like they're not playing properly if they go for something else. And so it really, in my eyes, like everything I tried made the game a lot worse. So the power-ups was a technique of sort of getting around that. And the power-ups, they give you a small set of cards, like 8 or 12. And you when you roll 3 hearts, I think it is, you can draw one of those cards. And the reason why it gets around that, and the cards are unique to the monster, but the reason it gets around that is because it maintains this idea that you have to deal with what you have, and you still are built. And so all these decks, while they may focus more on one strategy or the other, you may not draw the cards to support it. You may not draw any cards. You can actually play the game with cards there in the course of the game, draw 0 or 1. And so it left the overall strategy in the hand of the player, in my eyes.
How much thought do you put into play balance in terms of making sure that each of the monsters is similar enough in power? Because as you know, right, I mean, we only played the game twice. But I mean, we were literally discussing who was the most powerful monster at the end of the game. You know, I mean, it's just natural for gamers. So did you...
Were you playing Power Up?
No. We were playing just the original version. But they all had the cards that kind of came with them. You know what I mean?
No,
obviously.
The original version, the monsters are all the same.
Oh, no, then... okay, so then...
Yeah, you were playing one of the
I played the power-up one.
Yeah.
So my question stands then. So how much thought did you put into, is there a character that you feel is better than the other ones? Or and also, is that okay as a game designer? Like, do you not have an issue with that?
There is a 100%. I'm 100% certain there's a character better than the other ones, and I'm okay with that. But I don't know what that character is either. It's very hard usually to balance these out.
Yeah.
And there's enough noise in the system that by the time you sort of figure it out, you're going to have had plenty of entertainment.
So it's a great question that you asked, and it matters on what the value proposition is to the audience, so to speak. So King of Tokyo has a lot of randomness. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of skill. No one is going to, run the equivalent of the World Chess Championships for King of Tokyo. So, which we do for Magic, right? Like, or did. That game needs to be super, super, super well balanced. King of Tokyo does not, because it's just not. It's really not what it's about. At a fundamental level. So yeah, we could have, I'm sure we could have balanced it more, but we would have been putting in hundreds of hours of effort to make a product that's just barely better at all. Because no one really, plays King of Tokyo in the same way they're going to play, chess or, whatever. So.
No, totally. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, another thing about that is when you've got the unique characters, one of the things I specifically really like to do is give the characters something special and cool. And so having that in your roster is more important to me than overall balance. And that extends to a bunch of different games. For instance, in an MMORPG, for example, it would be less important to me if my character was as powerful as somebody else, as if my character had something cool that the other character couldn't do, that I did something better. And so I want to give all the monsters something which feels special.
Yeah, and I think that comes through. Because again, like it's just interesting for me to have this conversation just because it's so recent since I played it. And like every monster that we look through, because again, as typical nerds and as typical game people, as soon as we were done, we looked through everything, And you're right, like every monster seemed to have kind of a cool thing that was like, oh, I would like to play that. And the point I was going to make before, it's interesting. Like, I feel like the aesthetics of the game, if you change that, like, so for example, if you guys were mentioning earlier, like, maybe setting it in New York and maybe almost like having like a gangster theme to it. I don't know. I wonder if the game would be more competitive just because of the setting. Like, would people get more riled during the game as they're battling one another? Or is it now that you're just doing it with monsters and things like that, it's just immediately like
100%
hands-off pressure.
Absolutely. Because, no, and that's very critical. Richard is always very, in games that are intended to be, again, it depends on the audience and the type of game you're doing, but the IP is very important to us that gets put on it. As an example, King of Tokyo, let's say it were totally abstract, like, or not totally, but almost completely abstract, like chess or cards, right? People would play that game so competitively, like they wouldn't get into the characters. They wouldn't care about knocking out someone with claws or whatever. It would just be very strict. So immediately, the IP puts you into the mindset of, having fun, say, if that's what the goal is. So it matters a lot.
Gotcha. Well, guys,
sorry,
Richard,
go.
With
the gangster theme in particular, you could make the gangster theme serious. You could also, make it comic. And so it will never be in exactly the same place as the kaiju, but you can, you do have a lot of control over what the tone of the game is. And that's one of the things which Yellow, as our partners with the game, have done such a phenomenal job with. They really hit an excellent tone where you look at it and it puts you in a fun frame of mind. But at the same time, if you sort of look around, there's plenty of sort of serious areas too. And I love that mix. I like it when people can sort of engage it in both ways.
It's funny, like the overlap there with teaching, the overlap with being in the classroom. It's so striking, that parallel, right? Because the best kind of learning is when kids almost don't even realize that they're learning, because whatever it is that they're doing is so engaging. They're having so much fun. You have to almost point out the lessons. And again, that was one of my takeaways from King of Tokyo, which is the way that the game reads. It doesn't seem very serious, but when you actually kind of break it down, there's so much cool stuff going on, you know? What I was going to say earlier, we've already been going for about an hour. I don't necessarily intend on keeping you guys trapped here in this Zoom space for hours on it, even though I have a ton of other questions. What I was thinking is I wanted to start to get to some present stuff, if that makes sense. And I guess I'll ask a really unsophisticated question. What are you guys up to now? Because again, you know, for people that are listening out there, right? And I'm going to circle back to Magic, I promise, but what do really famous game designers then do once that particular project is sort of, you know, said and established? In other words, what kinds of games are you working on these days? Like what, or at least to some extent, like what are you allowed to talk about? Because again, I would imagine like you probably can't discuss everything. I don't know who wants to take that one.
Well, I'll start, and then Richard can join in. There's a couple things. We're always doing more expansions for King Tokyo. So there's always this ongoing project with Yellow, and then also with Mindbug, which is another game that we helped with, and now there's Mindbug King of Tokyo crossovers that have been announced. So we're working on those in addition to just standard King of Tokyo stuff. There are 2 electronic games that about half of what we do is video games. There's 2 of those that we're working on right now that are both in various stages of public access. So you can, there's demos up on Steam, and those are both. I'm just going to lay the groundwork, and then Richard can talk more in depth about them.
Awesome.
One of them is Chaos Agents, and the other is Vanguard Exiles. And Chaos Agents is through a company called Popularium, and Vanguard Exiles is through TEA Games and they're actually based in Australia, where Richard is. Anyway, and both of those 2 are similar, and we started them at wildly different times. The way that working on electronic games works is like you start these things, and then 3 years later they're finally coming out, or maybe in 1 year they're coming out, or whatever. So anyway, it's a little odd that they're coming out at similar times, but that's just the way the world works. Not under our control. Play the dice as they're rolled, and they're both auto battlers, and they're both unique deck game auto battlers. And the unique deck game is the stuff like Keyforge, where just to quickly catch the audience up, where Richard was trying to get back to this sort of non-constructed idea how Magic was originally played, where every single deck is unique and you can't swap cards between decks. And so that's how both of those games work as auto battlers. So now, Richard, and please check them out because they're cool, or are in the process of getting cool because they're both still in development. But like, gotcha. You'll see.
There's a few others that I'd like to add to that. Just a mention on the auto battlers. Auto battling is a really wonderful format of game in digital. I've been fascinated for a long time between games that are between board games and what might be considered classic video games, which would be more like simulations of some form or another, because they feel like they're both games, but they both feel like completely different breeds. And so I'm always excited when I find a game that lives in between, and that's what, to me, an auto battler is. So it feels like when you're playing it, like you're playing a board game, in the sense that you get to sit back and make decisions which are not particularly rushed. And then the part the computer does is you get to watch how that plays out as you auto battle other people. And with Vanguard Exiles, the idea is that the army you deploy into a dungeon, and the creatures wander around the dungeons. The dungeons are sort of I think we're calling it a diesel punk World War One,
fantasy World War One kind of thing.
Yeah.
Cool,
very cool. It's very cool. I think.
So that, like, the elves have use radiation as weapons, and so it's I love the flavor, but you're dropping your armies into these effectively dungeons, and then they wander around attacking each other, and whoever gets more control.
And it's 1v1 is the important thing, as Richard's about to contrast with the next one.
And I have to say, it's so awesome looking at how excited the two of you are talking about all these new things. That's very, I would surmise it's very empowering for a lot of people, given your long history in this field. So it's very cool. Sorry, Richard, I feel like I cut you off.
No. So Chaos Agents is an auto battler royale, which when you put it together like that, it seems like, of course, one has to exist, and that's what we're doing. You deploy agents on a field, and then
you deploy an agent.
You deploy an agent on the field. The players as a group deploy agents, one each, and each agent is unique, and they have a unique skill tree, which and so during the course of the game, what you do is you decide where you want to level up your agent and what sort of general guiding principles they have. But then, they're going around shooting each other and collecting gems, and this sort of ties back into a topic we were talking about earlier. How do you get a free-for-all game with a lot of interaction, which doesn't have a lot of politics? And one way is to say, well, it's an auto battle. You don't have all that much control over who you guys are shanking.
Yeah,
that makes total sense. Skaff, go ahead, dude.
So one more thing I forgot to mention is we did just come out with a trading card game with Bondi based upon the Sandland IP. There's a Sandland show on, I think, Hulu, and so it works very differently than a normal TCG, but it is much closer to a normal TCG than these other two games.
Gotcha.
So there's also a Kickstarter which is up right now for Half Truth, Second Guess. Half Truth was a trivia game we did a few years back, and is one I really like. And I don't usually laud my games in that way, but I just think Half Truth is. I guess I can do that in part because so much of the quality is being brought in by the questions, which are quite a number of them were written by Ken Jennings. But that is
the Jeopardy. That is the Jeopardy. Ken Jennings worked with us on this game. He's an awesome person. Like, he's awesome to work with. He's super smart, as you might be able to tell.
He is.
Jeopardy.
He spoke at my last school, the last school I worked at, a place called Hackley. Yeah, he spoke.
Great. He's great. And that's a great game, and it's on Kickstarter right now.
Yeah. Let me ask you guys a question, because I have a couple more. They're a little different than maybe some of the other topics that we've talked about. This one is specifically about games. I've always thought about this. So, do companies approach you and say, hey, we're looking for a particular kind of game? Or is it more like you guys think of a cool idea and then almost pitch it? Because again, I made that error at the beginning. It sounds like, right? So Wizards of the Coast existed already, and then you guys approached them? No. So maybe we should clarify. Maybe we take the first question and figure that out. So do you guys get approached, or do you approach the different companies?
Both. Yeah, it's a solid mix of both. Really quick example is KingofTokyo. Had no reason to do it. Richard just had this idea. He really wanted to do the game. It was great. So we approached every game company in the industry, and they all rejected it. Like every game company you can think of, any size. Like, hell, let's do it. No, don't like it. Through all of them. I mean, and this is Richard Garfield. This is long after he's done Magic and other successful stuff. And so it's like, okay, fine. So then Yellow takes a risk on it, but they had been a distributor for a while, but they're very young as a publisher. It was one of the very first games they published, which is probably the only reason that they accepted it. So yeah, okay.
Realize how fucking crazy that sounds, right? I'm sorry,
it was crazy.
That's like Metallica writing a record, and then a company be like, "Nah, Metallica, I don't know if I really want your album." That's absurd.
Exactly, right? Because you change the band name or whatever, and it's the same set of people or something in your no, it is crazy, and I think in King of Tokyo, you could say, oh yeah, it's a really good game, which of course it is, but it's also like for games that did not win Game of the Year, which it's sort of hard as an outside publisher to do that. It's one of the most successful ones ever in the last 20 years or so. So yeah, I mean, it's not like they all would have been happy to have it.
Right.
They just all rejected it.
So backing up again, just absolutely absurd, but backing up now. All right. So why don't we clarify this then? Right. So I was going to talk about Magic to kind of wrap up, but so Wizards of the Coast existed already, right? Meaning when you guys were designing Magic. So could you explain where the connection is between your design and that company?
Yeah, the situation is made. It's kind of complicated, but the Dime Tour is I had this game Robo Rally, which a friend of mine took upon himself to get published, and he pitched it to I think 7 or 8 different publishers, and they weren't interested. And then he decided to try this one that was just starting out, which was Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast liked it. But they didn't at the time have any products, so they were kind of they were so new they didn't have any product, and they weren't aiming to do board games. They were aiming to do role-playing games, and they weren't even really aiming to do role-playing games. They were aiming to do role-playing supplements. I mean,
yeah, they had one product in the pipeline, which was this Primal Order, that they formed the company in order to produce a role-playing game supplement. Then they met Richard's friend, Mike Davis. We should mention his name. And that. Okay, now keep going with the story.
So now they like Robo Rally, but are in no position to do it. And but they say, well, maybe we can do something that's cheaper. And so and they want something that plays quickly, like that people could play in the lines at conventions. And so that leads me to come up with Magic. And now they are also not in a position to do Magic, but they are so excited about it, they're going to make it work. And so they raise all sorts of money. I get this company, Garfield Games, and so Garfield Games owns part of it, Wizards owns parts of it, and then eventually these companies merge and keep the Wizards name. So in some ways, Wizards went through this transition at that point. But yeah, the Wizards. Yeah, so I forget what question I was answering, but
So in short, Richard and his friend Mike came to them with a board game, but then they came back to Richard and said, "Can you do us a card game?" He's like, "All right." Like so it's literally the answer, even for that one game, is in some ways both directions.
Yeah, it's wild. Again, it's just wild because this is what I was going to end with. Right. And again, it's probably going to make you both feel weird. That's fine. Right. So there's a game. I mean, no, I'm serious. Because I don't know. Great people probably don't think about this kind of stuff. We'll just have to see how this goes. Right. Look, there's a gaming store up by my house. I live in Torrington, Connecticut. And there's this absolutely wonderful place called the Tabletop Gaming Center. And I think about the two of you a lot because anytime I go there, right, obviously, Magic is a great game. And I know you guys haven't been involved with it for a number of years, right? Obviously. But I know what my experience was like as a kid, right? Without going into gory details. But, you go to this store, dude, there's 100 people playing Magic. There, and yes, it's a great game. But what stands out to me more than anything else is the way that games are a community builder. And you've got these kids, right, who are from all different fringes of society, but what brings them together is that particular game. And my question to you guys, and you can answer it any way you want, do you ever think about what you've done for this hobby? And when I say hobby, I mean gaming in general, because again, and I hope I'm not over talking here, but literally, I was sitting with my advisees the other day. These total sports kids and just absolutely delightful kids. And they're all playing on their phones, right? And when they describe the rules to me, I'm like, you guys are practically playing Magic the Gathering, you know? How does that make you two feel? And I don't know who wants to start. And I know it's a very sentimental question, but how does that make you feel in terms of legacy?
Well, I feel spend a fair amount of time feeling overwhelmed when I run into that, when I begin thinking about the impact that Magic has had. It did better than I thought it would, to such a degree that I would get dizzy from time to time in the first 5 years after it was published, and I still get some sense of that. But I feel like there's this sense of responsibility you have for how much time and influence you've had on people or cost people. But I'm such a fan of games and believe it's such a positive thing that I feel like, I don't know, I feel like a missionary, where it's like just feel good for having brought so many people into games in general, as opposed to Magic in specific. And I think people who have Magic as a hobby, that's great, and I'm really happy they get so much out of it. But what really makes me feel good is when they talk about how it was through Magic they discovered the larger hobby.
Skaff, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I do think about it, and in fact, just like we're intentional in thinking about game design, we're also intentional in thinking about the effect on the audience. So some of that actually is in that book a little bit. So yeah, we can we absolutely sit down, and that helped us make a lot of decisions. Like really early on, I can remember when the price of Magic cards was over retail, like practically crying in the stores, right? Because the kids couldn't buy it and whatever. So decisions about overprinting or whatever, or the Pro Tour, the same sort of thing. I mean, we probably all experienced like being nerds and laughed at with games. Like, I don't know that happened. There's so anti-bullying anymore. But I'm gonna tell you, growing up in the '70s, it was a little bit different. And so yeah, just the whole Pro Tour stuff and all that kind of thing about like making it worthwhile, and telling them that we're allowed to take things seriously. So the impact on, like, I mean, I know every game does it now, and people just can't even believe this, but there were really no proprietary games that had anything remotely like money or competition on them before Magic, including video games. All of that stuff, a lot of the early video game thing, pro stuff went back to Magic. But again, that was specifically because we cared about what the impact on the audience would be. I mean, people don't even realize, how much of all those decisions were driven by what's it going to be for the player. And we would get letters like every time it's very easy to become jaded in anything you do. But then in the industry, we would just get tons of letters from, like mothers saying, "Oh, my kid was struggling to read." And then he decided he really needed to learn because he wanted to read the rules on the Magic cards, right? Like and thinking logically and all that sort of stuff. So, it was it's very humbling, all that stuff. And then oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh no. All I was going to say is, I don't know. Like, I get what you mean, and I didn't necessarily want to go to this place because, like, you're talking about it. It's like there's always sort of negatives and positives, but then again, as game designers, like, here, let's not use you guys as an example. Like, if we look at Warhammer, right, which we always beat up on the show, even though I grew up playing that as well. But I don't know. It's hard to say. Is it really the company that transforms kids into people who are going to sit and just pour over codexes and make a really powerful army? And if it doesn't work out, it's going to kind of break them down. I don't know if it's necessarily the game designer's fault there, So do you follow what I'm saying? Meaning,
yeah. No, I get it, but I think as a game designer, or really as a game business person, or any type of business person in any industry, but yeah, I mean, there's this responsibility, to your customer.
Yeah.
Hopefully they'll give you, money, right? Because you're selling them something, but the better care you take care of them, the better off both sets of people are. Like, it's a positive trade.
No, totally. And look, I want to make a connection. I almost never talk about this stuff, by the way, but I feel like I should here just because, again, like, final point. I'm connecting a lot to what you're both saying, because the idea of the power of games, I mean, it's my career. It's literally my career, as like what I do every day, the conferences I go to, all of that. And, Richard, what you were describing earlier, and Skaff, what you were describing, I mean, I am that person, meaning like I hated school, hated it with a passion, but I always loved to learn. And the second I discovered games and full circle, right? Full circle or whatever. When I was kind of leaving school when I shouldn't to go to the library to play Magic, that was opening the intellectual curiosity in me. You know what I mean? And in a way, gaming is what sort of led me down my own sort of academic path to do the things I've done in my life. So you're kind of describing me, which is, so I guess what I'm saying is you're both right. Like what you're saying, like it has had a really positive impact on a lot of folks. So look, I really appreciate the fact that you guys came on. I know how busy you both are, so I really, really, really appreciate it. And I hope you guys had a good time, like more than anything else, being able to tell these stories.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. It's always fun to talk about games, and this conversation in particular was fun. So thanks.
Well, absolutely. And Skaff, thank you so much, for coming on. And again, like you were so humble at the beginning. You've done a lot of really cool stuff. And it's like I said, I'm just very appreciative that you were willing to write me back and come on the show.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, and we're open to doing something in the future too, as well, if you have other specific game questions or whatever. So,
Skaff, don't say that, my friend.
No.
I always have lots of questions. We
really love to talk about games, and like I know Richard has like 4 or 5 things he really wants to get out about games in the long run or whatever. Like, I wish everybody could have had the opportunity I had of talking with him about games, because
well, look,
now that more and more excited about stuff. So
yeah, and I can tell it is so freaking obvious how invested you guys are in games. So look, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you guys have been on the show now. This is your first sort of run. You're definitely invited back on. So next time that you guys are putting something out, or frankly, just next time you want to come on, we'll definitely make it happen. And like I said, for everybody listening out there, I hope this was as powerful a podcast for you as it was for me. Because like I said, without making these guys uncomfortable, these are the kinds of people that are doing great things and have done great things, for our hobby and for the whole industry in general. And I just wish that more people would put out really great games. It's that simple, All right, folks. So without further ado, I just want to say goodbye to you guys. And for everybody that's listening out there, I hope you guys enjoyed. See you all later.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to today's 20-sided gamified podcast. I hope you got as much out of the conversation as I did. If you're interested in learning more about the organizations I work with, please visit www.nextgengaming.org and www.nasaga.org. My Instagram handle is HMGS_nextgen_Inc. Until next time, be well, get some gaming in, and roll some 20s. Thank you so much.